At this point, I'd like to call up our keynote speaker, Mr. Brian Wheelock. He was an EMT and a first responder to Ground Zero. Come on up, Brian.
Thank you to members of the staff and to the Parsippany community, and also to our first responders that are here and family members of anybody that may have lost somebody that day. I just thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to hold this moment sacred, because part of what I wanted to talk about today was just how important it is to do this, to continue to hold this moment as a priority in our hearts and in our minds. I'll never forget that day, September 11th, the moment that myself and another EMT from our squad down in Homedale, my partner Chip Myers, approached Ground Zero. It was a little later in the day by the time we actually were arriving. It was about 7 p.m., so it was starting to get dark. As we approached, I remember the flashing lights of the ambulance that normally, you see reflecting off of buildings, but they began to bounce back in our faces more and more because the cloud of dust and smoke in the air was beginning to fill in. Even as we arrived, blocks and blocks away, nothing could ever have mentally prepared me for what I was about to see. I was only 26 years old at the time. I wasn't married with kids like I am now. Sometimes I wonder, if that call came in today, would I still run in there? Would I still forge ahead? Part of me goes, no way, I've got a wife and family. But these first responders here will tell you, something happens at that moment. And you just do it. You take over. You know there are people in need and you have to go. I remember I opened the ambulance door. We weren't prepared. We didn't have masks. We didn't have special gear. And the wave of cloud of dust that came over me was overwhelming. In fact, we were being flagged down by a police officer for somebody that was outside having difficulty breathing. So as I grabbed the oxygen and was trying to help this person breathe, I myself was having trouble. As we made our way down to Ground Zero, parked the ambulance, and let that person actually return back to their home, they began breathing okay on their own, we were able to release them. We parked the ambulance and began to walk through that scene that we've all seen, the pile. And it was just something that will always stick in my mind. I remember looking down and seeing the high heel of a woman's shoe on the ground and going, where's the woman? I mean, it wasn't like you can even explain what you saw that day, but there was just feet and feet that we had to go through in order to get there. I remember making our way around, up and around the pile, into the lobby of a hotel that had been made into a hospital. And it was fully staffed. I mean, you had nurses, doctors, IVs ready, lights. You wouldn't know, other than a couple of signs around, that you were inside the lobby of a hospital. The one thing that was notably missing were the patients. Everybody was ready, but the patients were not there, because we know how difficult it was to find anybody at that time. Finally, a report came in. They were pulling people out on the other side of the rubble. They requested those with ambulances with them to make their way around, return quickly to their ambulances, and follow a caravan to the other side of the pile. As we jumped in our ambulance and began to try to follow this caravan, several other ambulances in front of us, the amount of dust that was kicking up so much, you could not see more than a foot or two in front of you. So here we are in Lower Manhattan with no streets. There's nothing recognizable. Nothing. There was no street signs. There's nothing to tell you where you are. Being from New Jersey, our radio could not communicate with New York at that time. I sat there literally in this disaster scene, saying to my partner, I said, we are not doing well here. We're breathing all this stuff in. We have nothing. I said, we can't even get to where we're trying to go. I said, maybe we need to abort this mission and go back to New Jersey. And we sat there for a moment and said, you know what? I think it's time. We'd been there for a good few hours at that point. But eventually, we came back. But those 3 hours that I spent there would literally change my life forever. As of this day, I presently have 6 certified illnesses that they attribute to 9/11. 4 of them physical, 2 of them like PTSD and things. More for me, it's worrying about the future. What does the future hold for my life and my family? And that's what I struggle with on a daily basis. Thankfully, none of those illnesses are life-threatening, and I thank God for that. It is disturbing to me to find out that soon after we came back, the ambulance that we brought with us that day, the engine seized, and it could no longer be used because of all that it inhaled. And I think to myself, we were there the same amount of time. You know, you may have heard in the news around this time of year, the number of first responders that have passed away, and others at Lower Manhattan, is now approaching the number of people that died that day. And that's a tough, tough thing to swallow. But for those we've lost, and those that we continue to lose, we have an obligation to hold this moment sacred, as we are all doing right now. You'll all remember the phrase, never forget. Never forget, that was everywhere. But I want to add something to that. It's always remember. Because there actually is a difference. According to Merriam-Webster, forget is to lose remembrance of or be unable to think of or recall. The definition of remember is a little different. To cause something to come back into your mind. And as painful as this is, especially for family and those that are here that may have lost somebody, this is painful to do. But we need to do this together. Here we are 18 years later, and this September 11th, now not maybe for us, but for a lot of people, it's starting to look a lot like any other day. My wife and I have back to school night tonight. We have people I know had work meetings and things they had to be at this morning. You go back 5-7 years, this day was still held more sacred. Things were not scheduled as they are now. Things are creeping into sacred territory. And we need to fight to keep this day a sacred part of the DNA of our country. Even one of my daughters had a science experiment going on at the middle school today, and we chose, you know what, she needs to be there. 2 of my daughters are here. In fact, one of them has a dentist appointment after we leave. Oh, sorry, Mom. I think I warned her. But we need to remember that 9/11 is, again, part of our country's DNA. And you know what? If next year we have to be somewhere, and sometimes we may have to be somewhere, at 8:46 or whatever time the first plane hit, we need to take a moment to pause and say, you know what? Raise our hand. If we're in a sales meeting, in fact, we need to ring a bell.
Sure, let's do that.
Okay. And you know what? Maybe we won't have a bell to ring, but we can raise our hand if we're in that meeting or whatever and say, you know what, people, friends, coworkers, let's just take a moment. This is a sacred moment we're approaching. We need to just take a moment, have a moment of silence. Can we take 5 minutes out of this, whatever event we're doing, and just maybe reflect for a minute? You'd be surprised that people may respond. I remember actually 8 years ago today, September 11th, 2011, I happened to be flying home from a wedding in Ireland. I had lived in Ireland years and years before that. I was on a flight that was landing at Newark Airport at 11:25 in the morning on September 11th on the 10-year anniversary. Packed plane, 747, full of people. I just got this overwhelming feeling that we have all these people together. It's approaching 9 o'clock. We need to honor this in some way, but here I am with strangers, full of people I don't know from every walk of life, every race, every religion. It was pretty represented in a few hundred people there. And sometimes you get that nudge. I call it a nudge from above. You gotta get out of your seat. Sometimes you don't want to do that. I didn't want to do it that day. But I felt this nudge to go ask the flight attendant if maybe I could say something over the loudspeaker. If we can hold this moment sacred, pray, something to acknowledge this moment that we had together. Of course, I didn't think they were going to go for this. Post 9/11, we know the rules. But I did it anyway. I got out of my seat. I explained I was a first responder to 9/11 and how important this moment was to me, and that I thought we should all share it together and acknowledge it in some way. She looked at me like I was crazy, but she said, I'm going to ask the pilot. and see what he says. And she picked up that little phone, told him the situation, and turned to me and said, he said, yes, are you ready? Let me run to the bathroom, I said, and gather my thoughts, as I did this morning. But anyway, 2 minutes. But it was an important moment to do that. And she walked me to the front of a 747 and said, ladies and gentlemen, a passenger wants to address the plane. Now, I have a feeling they were more concerned than they should have been at that moment. But I got on the loudspeaker and I explained that I was a 9/11 first responder and we were approaching that exact moment 10 years later. And I said, I think this is an important moment. I said, I know we have many walks of life here. I said, I happen to be a Christian, but I know people from every religion and faith here. We need to take a moment of silence, and if you won't mind, please, let's bow our heads. We'll take a moment of silence. I'll pray for a safe landing and that we can heal from this tragedy. I couldn't believe the response. Everybody, no matter what color they were, or type of any gender, whatever, they all bowed their heads, and we shared that moment together. When I completed that, everybody began applauding. I just prayed for protection and that God would give us the strength to heal and that we would remember that moment was sacred. As I made my way back to the seat and as I was in the plane, people just kept coming up to me and thanking me for making the point of taking that moment and making it sacred. Next 9/11, it may be your turn. Maybe you won't be on a 747. Maybe you'll be somewhere else, a meeting, a school. But we have to make a point of taking that as a sacred moment. Because I can tell you, the family that have lost people, they can't do it alone. Other first responders that were there that day that may be much more ill than me, they can't do it alone. We need each other to lean on. And we need to engage and learn other people's stories to help us heal from this tragedy. Remember, always remember, is to cause something to come back into your mind. And I think this country needs that right now. Remember what it was like after 9/11? Remember how every other car had an American flag on it? Do you remember the patriotism we felt that day? We need that again. And each one of us can make a difference in bringing that back. I truly believe that by sharing our past, loving on one another like we're doing here today, I believe it will bring us great hope and healing to our future. God bless you all, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian. You make us all very proud.